to the Fostering AfterCare Podcast. I'm your host, Angie. This show is built around The Long Way Home, a 3-season journey into what it means to heal after foster care. Each season, we'll walk a different stretch of the road together. Here, in Season 1, we're exploring disenfranchised grief, the silent, complicated losses that come after aging out of foster care. Grief that often goes unseen, unspoken, or misunderstood. This is a space to name that grief, to heal out loud, and to remember that even if the road is long, you don't have to walk it alone. There are certain what-if questions that follow you like shadows, and we will be exploring some of those questions in this episode. So, by the way, this episode is sponsored by the Empty Frames Initiative. I shared a bit about our relationship history together in episode 2. Their mission is to empower orphaned and vulnerable youth as they transition out of state care by providing life skills training, counseling, community, and access to the gospel. Again, you can learn more at www.fillingemptyframes.org. Let's get back to the show. Going into these questions, some of them have been like, what if I had grown up in a stable home? What if I had 2 parents to catch me when I fell, so the fall wasn't so devastating? What if I didn't have to survive before I could dream? For those of us who've aged out of foster care, these aren't just idle reflections. They tend to resurface as reminders of the foundation we never had. Actually, psychologists call this disenfranchised grief. It's described as a loss that society doesn't always recognize, like grieving a person or a relationship that was never whole or safe to even begin with. If you've ever felt that ache for a parent's love, a safe place, or a childhood you never got, I want you to know that it's okay to name it. You're not broken for missing what never was. Naming that grief is a form of healing. Before we continue, a quick disclaimer. The conversations we have here on fostering aftercare may bring up difficult emotions or memories. So please be mindful and aware of how you're feeling, your well-being as you listen. Many of us carry feelings that have been deeply repressed or suppressed, and it's okay to pause. It's okay to take a breath or even come back later. If you need additional support, though, reach out to trusted community like your church family, your friends, your relative, or mentors. If it's, further than that, professional resources like therapy or a counselor. You don't have to carry these things on your own. You deserve to feel and be supported. Okay? So let's continue. I actually thought I was done grieving my parents after 8 years, past the point that I aged out. But I still have hope that one day my parents will change. And when I became a mommy and saw that my parents' circumstances still mirrored my childhood experiences, it hurt me. I was like, we're still doing this. Still didn't learn. So from their words to their behavior, it deeply affected me. And those wounds reopened because the dysfunction wasn't in the past. It was still happening in the present. And their decision not to heal, to be available as parents in my adulthood or grandparents for my child, while still choosing the chaos and disregard for not only my and my siblings' well-being, but also, or, my family's well-being, also their own. It stung me like deeply. And it continues to, throughout the years, it has continued to resurface at birthdays, holiday season, of course. It's a whole other thing. Holiday season and, just the milestones that come up with just like regular human life, right? Like weddings and, turning 21, turning, I guess it's birthdays too, but milestones like having a child or, um, like I said, getting married, buying a house, or moving into your first home, like those types of things where it's like the attention and focus is supposed to be on celebration of your growth, needing that support and that camaraderie, that community, that family, and your parents specifically. It's like those moments are reminders of where, the empty seats are. Like, okay, these seats, mother and father still there, or, other supports, and it reveals very clearly what's missing. Even so, I choose not to sit around wishing for what I never had. I still hope, as I said earlier, my parents might one day change, but I also see how God sends people to stand in those gaps. Like my aunt who shows up, a sibling who, offers comfort in those moments or celebratory moments, a friend who becomes like family, like our chosen family. And it's such a big blessing. And trying to lean in and focus in on those moments more so than those empty seats. These relationships don't erase the pain, but they do prove that love can grow in the cracks. The imagery that comes to mind is the rose that grows through the concrete. So, like I shared in episode 1, a stable home is more than four walls. It's knowing your basic needs will be met and that someone will be there when life takes an unexpected turn. It's belonging. It's, that connectedness, that deep peace and love, that you belong to someone somewhere and knowing that you're cared for. Without that, there's no built-in confidence, no blueprint for love or partnership. I remember my sophomore year at North Carolina Central University when a snowstorm shut down the campus. The cafeteria was closed, the power went out, and to make matters worse, I looked in the fridge and I had no food at all. So, how was I going to survive this snowstorm? It could last a couple days, the rest of the day, a couple weeks, no idea. And with no parents to call, I decided to reach out to some of my acquaintances and even professional contacts at the time. Reaching out to professional contacts for personal, support. We're all humans, but if you are a listener, you have professional contacts and you're in a situation, 9 times out of 10, if you can avoid it, you're not going to reach out to them. But that's where I was. I was at a point of like, hey, there's no food. I can't go anywhere. My phone is about to die. What can I do? So I'm reaching out to my professional contacts as well. And, it was exhausting. That kind of reaching out is exhausting. And, at the time, my former Garnet Lightum answered my message and she ended up showing up with groceries, braving those icy roads out in Durham, North Carolina. And she didn't have to, but she chose to meet me in my humanity. That is what I needed at that time. I think someone to answer my call for help for, I literally, due to the weather, was unable to do much. Like I desperately needed help. And in that, moment, it was a moment that family was unavailable to meet that need. But luckily the Garnet Lightum did show up with groceries, brought those groceries up to the door and I brought them into my dorm room. I think I had to go down a couple of stairs and picked those up on the side door. And that act of kindness remains etched in my memory as proof that presence really matters and humanity obviously exists, right? I believe that it's imperative to remember that behind every statistic is someone just trying to eat that night, someone just trying to stay warm, someone just wanting to feel safe. Another what if question I have had in my life is what if I had parents with stable housing? Oh man, I probably wouldn't have experienced being unhoused so many times after aging out. Housing instability is another cost to not having a firm foundation. In 2017, after returning from a job in Oregon, I believed I had housing with a friend. Before I left, we had a conversation about our roommate agreement with the promise of refining details once I returned. This was a friend I had for 3 years. It started with her being my RA at my dorm freshman year in college, and where I learned she had experienced the foster care system and she had been adopted in her youth, which was a little bit different than me. I had never been adopted, but she was now 25. And I thought she was, at the time, I thought she was like a super adult. I laugh about that now. I was only 21, so I looked up to her in many ways and I was really excited about being roommates. So the night I arrived, where I had Ubered to what I thought was home, after an exhausting 9-hour flight from Portland Airport to the Raleigh Airport, dude, as soon as I got in the townhouse around midnight, she was out with a sheet of paper. So she came out and she handed me the sheet of paper and I set down my bags. I was completely disheveled from my journey. It was a long 24 hours and puzzled as to what would be so urgent to address at this moment. Also, I had just been going through like a breakup recently. So just, a lot going on. And she stood in front of me with her arms crossed as I read through the list and I scanned the top of the paper and read house rules. I'm like, and I asked her, what's this? And she answered, my house rules. Since you're a guest in my home, this is what I'm asking of you, or something like that. And so I was further confused, of course, and was attempting to get clarity on the words she used, like my house, because I thought it was ours and the rules instead of, I thought they would be like shared agreements that we could come up with together. What had changed, in the last couple of months from my internship? So anyway, I don't quite remember exactly how everything settled that night. But I remember I went to bed and she also went to her room and I got a little rest that night. Did not sleep well. The next day, after she came home from work, she was tense and asked to speak with me. I obliged and I wanted to learn more about this list of rules that I had found kind of reminded me of living in a foster home and she as my foster parent. So I really didn't like this dynamic. And so as the conversation unfolded, I found her to be very, very unreasonable. Like literally no budge. So with no budge on the rules, like only shower between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. and no visitors and giving me a curfew of 9 p.m. First of all, curfew is wild. Curfew 21, like a curfew of 9 p.m. and we're supposed to be friends, we're supposed to be roommates is wild. Anyway, she gave me a curfew of 9 p.m. because she expressed she was a light sleeper because I was like, okay, why is it 9 p.m.? Like, and she's like, I'm a light sleeper. I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep if I'm woken up by the door being opened or closed. I can hear everything and even the sound of like your footsteps going up and down the stairs. Like I would prefer if you're just in your room after 9 p.m. So after that, and no budge, no like empathy on my end, like trying to hear me out on like my experience that it's not really working for me. and like just maybe if we can tweak it a little bit, while I'm here. But I knew I wasn't going to be able to stay with these rules, and I knew I was going to have to find somewhere else. And unfortunately, it very much was not my home after all. Within our conversation, I knew I was, I let her know I was more than happy to pay rent. And I even attempted to find some kind of negotiation about her rules that made me feel uncomfortable. And, like I said, there was no budge. So it really felt like it was a dictatorship. And she was really adamant that I was welcome to stay as a guest. I remember just, she kept on saying, "You're welcome to stay as a guest. You're a guest. You're a guest and not a roommate." And I let her know that it was unreasonable and I'd find somewhere else to go. And, I really value our friendship. I want to remain friends if possible during this time. I don't know what she's going through. And I tried to ask, what she was going through because it seemed very much a very different shift from when we first talked about it. But, as the days went on and I found her rules to be extremely restrictive as an adult, and as I said, unreasonable, I did shower outside the time frames given. And I did come back to the townhouse after going and hanging out with my friends a little bit later than she would have liked. And I was met with her waiting for me downstairs with her arms crossed and her face frowned. And after the second time of that, of only 10 minutes past the time she asked, just really trying my best to oblige by that, but no wiggle room where like, me and my friend may get caught up while we're talking. I'm like, "Oh, I have a curfew at this particular time," just trying to honor, my other friends' thing. And, there was just no like wiggle room for just anything. So 10 minutes past the time she asked, I came in. And after that whole conversation, I made the decision that I was going to leave the following day. And in a wild turn of events, I ended up in a very unstable and unlivable environment with the people whom I was removed from by CPS. Hint, hint, read between the lines who I'm saying. Not only was the entire experience re-traumatizing, but it was also really hard to start over again. This time again, unhoused, and at the time, what felt like very much alone mentally. So, within 2 weeks and the motivation that I was starting school at NC State, because I had applied, I think it was in October, to transfer from NCCU to NC State at the time. So I was starting school at NC State. I secured an apartment in a safe neighborhood thanks to a connection through someone I had stayed in contact with and community resources. And I began rebuilding. I began at State that following spring, which for context, it was September when I arrived at my friend's townhouse, then was unhoused in mid-October, then had an apartment in November, and started school in January. And so you can see here very clearly, when you lack a safety net, every misstep cuts deeper. Every misstep just can be extremely debilitating and so much more difficult to do anything. I thought I had lined up housing, so that way I could just smoothly go into school, start school in January. I was like, September, I got it all figured out. So many turns of events happened, and without it would have been so much easier, I think, if, it didn't work out with my friend and I could just reach out to my parents and be like, hey, they had stable, healthy, safe housing. And I was like, hey, I could just, go back to my parents. If anything fails, I can just go back to my parents. That was not my experience. So let's bring it to the data. Nationally, between 31 and 46% of young people who age out of foster care experience homelessness by age 26. I was absolutely part of that 31 to 46% because, again, that wasn't the only time. That's not abstract. It's a lived reality, as you just listened to. Instability also wears down mental health. My mental health at the time like as I shared a little bit, I was experiencing a breakup. There was so many other things happening. So youth in foster care are nearly 3 times more likely to report anxiety or depression than their peers. I'm going to say that again. Youth in foster care are nearly 3 times more likely to report anxiety or depression than their peers. And while brain science shows decision-making abilities aren't fully developed until around 25, support often ends years earlier. In the previous episodes, I shared that my experience from 20 was when that support ended from the system, even though it was up to 21 in North Carolina. And even then, as we look at the data for neurodevelopment, 25, I had at least 4 more years before my frontal lobe would close, right? And I had already experienced all these things in just a short period of time: September, October, November, December. And then January is when I started school. So, about 5 months before I started school again, and so much happened. We're asked to leap into adulthood while still building the wings we need to fly. And too often, the crash is costly. For those of you who've aged out, and those of us who've aged out, your need for support isn't weakness. We are human. And for those who serve or mentor young people, let this be a reminder that, again, your presence saves lives. You may not see the impact immediately, but it lasts far beyond a case file. The absence of a stable home, healthy relationships, financial literacy, and a supportive network isn't just a personal loss. It's communal and systemic. When young people are left without these foundations, it affects families, it affects workplaces, schools, and communities. And when foster parents, social workers, or mentors burn out because they aren't supported, those fragile connections disappear, leaving young people even more isolated and, again, unsupported. So Dr. Bruce Perry, in What Happened to You, it's a book that I've been reading recently, writes about relational poverty. He names it more so. And so social capital is one of the most underrated yet essential parts of our well-being as humans. We live and breathe connection. And I think about that moment, when I'm reaching out to different people when I was in the dorms and there was a winter storm, a snowstorm, ice everywhere. Like, I really did reach out to so many people. I reached out to professional contacts. I reached out to friends. I reached out to acquaintances even. And unfortunately, a lot of them didn't really respond. And I know because later we had a conversation, they didn't respond because they were burnt out. They didn't respond because they had their own personal experiences going on and their own mental health challenges, their own family situation, someone, passing away, whatever it was. And so when we think about, this social capital, it's not just for the young people. It's also for those foster parents, those social workers, those mentors, those CASAs, garden ad litems. If we want better outcomes, we have to strengthen the entire ecosystem of care. The caregivers need consistent counseling and resources as well. Professionals need peer support to lean on. Communities need that training to sustain the bonds beyond case files. And I believe part of that is understanding neuroscience, neurodevelopment, and the effects of not supporting that neurodeveloping brain from infant to even in utero. But, utero 0 to 25, like that is such a pivotal point in time. And I believe that's how we prevent foster care from becoming another layer of trauma on top of the original pain, because it does domino effect. When I think about with the roommate situation that I just shared, like I did reached out to different people because I saw where this was going, where that relationship was going, where that situation was going. And at the same time, The only people who did respond to me were the same people I was removed from to begin with, and their environment and situation and behaviors hadn't changed. So I was forced to go back into that environment, and it was extremely detrimental. And I thank God that I was able to reach out and still have some semblance of a, mental well-being in order to reach out for help. And that reach out for help was answered by at least one person that then connected me to another person in their area of social capital who, supported in sending funds for the down payment of that apartment. And, I had connection to a different organization that supported with first month's rent, things like that, like real tangible, practical ways that they helped me become housed after experiencing being unhoused. So, if you're a mentor, a foster parent, social worker, or a community member, ask yourself, who can I stay connected to after the system steps away? Who in your life right now, or in what ways can you be involved that you can stay connected to someone after the system steps away? Because the life still goes on. The life circumstances still unfold and the support is still needed. And who could use a simple check-in or a simple checkup? Your consistency might be the bridge that keeps someone from completely falling through the cracks. Each of these stories is its own what if. What if my parents had protected me? What if I had grown up watching a healthy relationship unfold at home? What if housing had been steady enough to focus on school instead of survival? These questions shape my adulthood and often resurface as grief in new forms. Yet, what I have learned is reclamation and redemption is possible. God has a way of taking what once felt lost and weaving it into something redemptive. I've seen him do it in my own life. For me, reclamation looks like nurturing a healthy marriage, building a loving home for my son, and being the safe, healthy, and supportive adult I wish I had to someone who is currently experiencing similar moments I did. Of course, this doesn't erase the grief, but it does prove that what once felt out of reach can still be grasped. Reclamation is about proving that the lie that says because we didn't have a foundation, we can't have stability, we can't have love, we can't have peace, is exactly that. It's a lie. We can draw new blueprints and lay new foundations where none existed before. If you're listening right now, maybe it's time to start drawing your own blueprint. What's one what if that you feel called to release? And what's one new what if that you can reimagine? Aging out doesn't have to feel like grieving a life you never got to have. It should feel like building new possibilities alongside people who stay in a healthy way. Aging out can become the moment you start building what God always intended you to have: safety, love, and a peace that lasts. For me, I attempt to acknowledge the losses as part of my story, but not the ending. So I leave you with this question: how can you help shape a young person's what if narrative into a story of redemption rather than grief? And so before we close, I'd like to pray with you. Father, I lift up every listener carrying the weight of what ifs. Heal our foundations. Replace fear with peace, loneliness with connection, and grief with hope. Surround each one with steady voices and safe relationships that reflect your love. Your word in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 7 reminds us, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Elohim Yahweh, may our lives flow from this understanding of love. May our futures be built on your promises and not on wounds or worldly definitions. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. If you want to dive deeper into this, I'd love to hear from you, or you can journal this question. Have you carried what if questions into adulthood? And how does that show up today? Something you can take into your therapy session or talk with a counselor or a trusted friend. I invite you to share your own what ifs with someone. If you're an ally, again, how can you show up in ways that transform grief into reclamation or redemption? How can you be better supported so you can go out and support others better as well? You've been listening to the Fostering AfterCare Podcast. If you are enjoying Season 1, then I want to invite you to write a short review on the platform you're listening in so others can find this podcast. Right now, under the Long Way Home theme, we are exploring the quiet, complicated grief that follows us after aging out of foster care. If something in today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, even when the road feels long, you don't have to walk it alone. So, until next time, take care.